do you want from me? Why don't you run from me? What are you wanting? What do you want?
Hello, my gardens of earthly delights. Today we're taking a look at Kinks and Cantrips by T.S. Michaels for 5th edition D&D. And this is a good opportunity to talk about such topics without worrying about monetization, etc. Because as I show you this book, it's very clear that this video will not be able to be monetized. So excuse me if I drift a little bit and make the most of this opportunity to talk about these subjects in a way that one cannot normally because of fiscal censorship. So who am I to review such a thing? Well, I grew up kinky before the internet and always thought there was something wrong with me up until I encountered the books of John Norman, the Korean Chronicles. Yes, I know, but to someone growing up pre-internet, suddenly realizing that you weren't alone and you weren't some kind of monster, that was worth a lot. I spent some time in the periphery of the UK kink scene, lurking in a way that probably seemed perverse. I used to lie to two sets of people so that I could find out more about it. I would tell my friends that I had to stay home with family. I would tell my family that I was going to go and see friends, and then I would go off and learn what I could. Shame is a terrible thing. And a lot of it surrounds sexuality, so maybe that's a bit why I'm so against it. I wrote a couple of kinky, sexy RPG books, Nymphology, Blue Magic, and Quintessential Temptress, both of which I wrote for Mongoose Publishing. Back then, we had to hide behind humour, which was frustrating, and not in the good way that frustration can sometimes be. But I tried to smuggle some seriousness in, under the radar, so to speak. More so in Quintessential Temptress than Nymphology. So in some ways the books were neither one thing nor the other in a lot of ways, and perhaps suffered for it. I also run Tabletopless, tabletopless.org, which is a combination of adult camgirl entertainment and role-playing. Role-playing as you experience it at home in a lot of ways, apart from the sexy stuff. So yeah, it's got everything that's real and true about role-playing, just with a lot of sexy time on top. Now, I was rather jealous and frustrated about this book and some similar other books that have come out, because they've raised more on crowdfunding than I got for writing my previous books, and they didn't have to hide behind humour as much. It feels like myself and the people that wrote the Book of Erotic Fantasy, we were kind of like pioneers. These are Johnny-come-latelys, and not come lately in the good sense, who kind of are getting money for something that we did. But I realised that being jealous and frustrated and so on was unworthy of me, and I should be celebrating the fact that we can now discuss and publish these sorts of things somewhat more openly, though I'm sure there were problems crowdfunding and being as explicit as you perhaps wanted to. And there can be problems selling, and there can be problems with payment processors, and all kinds of things. So frankly, it's a fucking miracle that this shit came out at all. There is one aspect of this that still bothers me. Back in the day, I had to hide behind humour. I could include sexy stuff, provided everyone knew that it wasn't to be taken seriously, that it wasn't ever really intended to be used in a game. That sort of thing. We could all have a laugh at the smutty puns and all the rest of it. Right? That was the cover I had to hide behind. I feel like this book and similar books have to hide behind a protective shield, a queer veneer, right? And the fact is, heterosexual people enjoy this kind of stuff as well, and there is some heterosexual illustration and so on in here, but giving things a queer veneer turns the profane, sexuality, pornography, whatever, into the sacred. The inclusion of queer material and emphasis somehow insulates these kind of books from criticism and censorship in the same way that humour did in the past. And that feels icky. It devalues both queerness and sexuality. And it's also frustrating because only queer sexuality gets this kind of protection in a lot of ways. I'm not saying it's universal. Lots of people are heavily against queer sexuality of any kind, but they're also against expressions of heterosexuality. Now, you will find a bunch of reactionaries saying, well, there should be a straight pride month and a straight pride parade. You know, that aspect of it, no. But there would be value, I think, in having some kind of more general pride in sexuality, even hetero pride, if you prefer. Stripper floats, sex workers marching, things like that. If we could celebrate sexuality, full stop, in the same way we celebrate Pride Month and things, I think that would actually have value, countering that shame that I was talking about earlier. Now, this is far from the first erotic game or erotic book to come out, going all right the way back to What's New with Phil and Dixie in Dragon magazine. They were always teasing that they were going to talk about sex in D&D. Phil Foglio, the cartoonist, was obviously involved in that and made an adult card game called Xenophile with 3 X's. Somehow got away with it back then. I think the inclusion of romance and sexuality really kind of came up with Dragonlance, based on the source material and so on. Sexual play, I think, also got much bigger with the rise of the internet. You had internet relay chat, you play by email, play on news groups. On these days, it's probably Discord. Back then it was the Silk and Steel Tavern. If you were into Korean stuff, the Lonely Inn, perhaps. Second Life is full of sex and kink, much of it dodgy as fuck, but it's there. I think the internet allowed people to engage with sexual roleplay at a safe remove, with a degree of anonymity which doesn't so much exist on Discord, but I suspect that's where a lot of sexual RP is going on these days. Correct me if I'm wrong. Let me know if it is. Why doesn't anybody invite me? LARP, the rise of LARP in the 90s, I think that was also a hotbed of sexuality, whether it's the foam sticks that you're hitting each other with, or whether it's salon LARPs. There's certainly a lot of bed hopping that goes on at the Boffer LARPs, and there was certainly a lot of using the game as a way to test the waters in vampire role-playing, vampire LARP. And I certainly got a lot of sexualized downtimes from people playing with each other, or wanting to play around with NPCs. So interesting times indeed. But enough preamble. The point is, I know this stuff. I am in this stuff, and I think I am uniquely qualified to pass judgment on it. This book, Kinks and Cantrips, is half material that can be used in just about any game. 95% or so of it is stuff that you can bring into just about any game. And half of it is a world book for a world called Bundheim. Now, It's time for some tough love, and it's not the first time you're going to run into, or last time you're going to run into tough love in this book. It may be hard to accept, and I understand the appeal of having your game world in black and white on the page in a book and sold to other people. But the truth is that the vast and overwhelming majority of people are not going to be buying this book for your game world that you have created. Most people aren't interested. Most game worlds just don't have the critical mass or the appeal for enough people for it to be worthwhile having your cosmology and your world and everything set out. And believe me, I feel this pain. Our erotic D&D world that we play in on tabletopless.org, is something I put out in Gazetteers, and they don't sell fantastically well, but it's nice to have them there, and I include rules that anybody can use in the same way that the latter half of this book is mostly rules that can be applied anywhere. So, you know, I've succumbed to the same thing. I've run into the same problem, is what I'm saying. But it's just true. Most people aren't going to be interested in Bundheim. They're not buying the book for Bundheim unless you are a Wizards of the Coast or a TSR as was, or unless you're Critical Role and you have that critical mass of support. Most people just don't give a single solitary fuck for your game world. They're just going to incorporate things into their own. So for most people, right, this first half of the book is completely pointless and useless and a waste of space, other than the art, right? Yeah, it's just the truth of it, and it is annoying for a lot of people, I think. Especially, look, this is tied to 5e, right? People are either going to homebrew their own worlds, or they're going to use one of the established ones, and they're going to bring your rules into it. It's just the way of the world. I mean, it's fine. This world, Bundheim, it's got a mix of cheekiness, seriousness, and obviously an overt sexual focus. But as I find with my own kinky games and worlds, the chaste and sexless nature of vanilla D&D tends to lead us to overcompensate somewhat. So, like, in this world, there's a city where all the street lamps are bondage fairies. Cool idea, nice visual, completely impractical, and an example of overcompensation, right? It's a bit much because vanilla D&D is so sexless, romance free. There is this tendency when you include sexuality to overcompensate and to put it everywhere, which is fine in my sort of case where it's a performance show, but otherwise I don't see that it's plausible, and plausibility is what I tend to aim for in my material, rather than realism or rather than untethered fantasy. So yeah, it's an issue. But this is about half the book, Bundheim and its various repercussions and aspects, and then you get into the second half of the book, and this is the rules and so on, and this is where things get more interesting and more useful. I would rather have seen more of this than the world, but again, I understand the reason, the appeal of seeing your own world in print and having it for yourself as a reference book. Perhaps, you know, that's still a useful thing. Alright, when it comes to rules, we have a pleasure and pain mechanic. Yeah, it's a bit like exhaustion, with levels. You have a number of levels in each, equal to half your con. If you max out on pleasure, you're stunned for a turn, take about a minute to recover. Perhaps for men, that should be 15 minutes. For women, perhaps they shouldn't need any recovery period, because life just isn't fair like that. If you max out on your pleasure, you lose half your pleasure. If you max out on your pain, then you have disadvantage and penalties to your wisdom and charisma. Those levels slowly normalize over time as pleasure or pain fades. Seems like a lot of bookkeeping to me. It's not sexy. It's keeping tabs. So I don't know. It might have been better to have like conditions of agony and bliss, something like that you could just apply for a short time, and have people to roll to recover from, instead of these gradated levels. That said, I understand why you might want to do it like that. Some people have done drunkenness in levels as well. But yeah, it's fine. It's just it's bookkeeping, which isn't sexy and which tends to slow down the game. We've got details on all kinds of restraints and bindings, and interestingly, a topic which I've grappled with in various games is the loss of agency. So when it comes to restraints, BDSM and so on, there is a certain loss of agency that being in that situation represents. And how do we deal with that in games? Because it's realistic for, you being tied up, or you being terrified or mind controlled or whatever else. But at the table, it's a whole lot of no fun. Where was I? Oh yes, restraints. But we finished with that. So, intoxicants. That's where we are. So there are more in-depth rules on intoxicants. Something that rarely has any sort of official version in many rules sets. So it's something that might, be missing. If you want to include drugs with your sex, you've got options for that here. And it would be nice if games had an included mechanic for drunkenness or too much weed or whatever other options there might be. A scale of inebriation on various substances might be something nice to have. Or, conditions like drunk, stoned, buzzing on E, whatever else. It would be nice to have. It's not that outlandish to have that here. So it's nice to have, and you might want to take these rules and apply them to your other games. Now we have a bunch of new species or races that you can play. Yeah, I might have taken a different tack given the popularity of monster girls and so on, and given you like a shopping list of traits that you could put together to create whatever you wanted. They kind of half-ass it here when it comes to the many options that there are, but there are some more in-depth and better options for other things. So, like, you have intelligent humanoid slimes, if you like your gooey girls. You have furry characters, which are absolutely haram and degenerate and should be banned immediately. You have mythkin, which kind of fill in the kind of monster girl gap, but not really. They're not really complete rules for that sort of thing, and that's unfortunate. It feels like a missed opportunity. It would have taken a lot of space, but then if you'd left out the game world stuff, you could have included it. There are Zicubi, which is the equivalent of tieflings for this setting. The horns give you something to hold on to. These ones are more explicitly and directly linked to incubi and succubi, or their equivalent. There are also lineages, which you can swap in for races. Not a lot of options here. Alpha and Omega, which are kind of what you expect, the sort of ultra-dominant and the ultra-submissive. And Unified. This last one's a bit more tied to the game world, so not as much use for everybody else. There are backgrounds that are useful for a sexually oriented campaign. Meat Marketer, which is kind of like a matchmaker for doms and subs and whatever else. Curious Explorer, if you feel that you're more of a butters and you're kind of bike curious. Sadistic Artist, if you want to play that sadistic dom role. dungeoneers for both kinds of dungeons, teratologists who tame monsters, often for sexual purposes. Maids and dancers are options here as well. Backgrounds, I feel like they don't really mean that much to characters in 5th edition. I mean, you could get away with backgrounds and just have like a keyword and it would work just as well. I hope in the new edition backgrounds are a bit more important, especially as they're de-emphasizing races, but I haven't kept abreast of the D&D playtesting and so on. Class-wise, you get a new class, Escapologist, Janus Stark type character maybe. Maybe a bondage game shouldn't include a character type that completely negates bondage. Feels like it kind of misses the point a bit. Everything else that's presented as a subclass, and to be honest, Escapologist might have been better as a rogue subclass in and of itself. Amongst the various subclasses that you have access to, of particular note amongst others, are the Path of the Titan, which is a barbarian subclass about macrophilia and vor. Lovely. That's about as hardcore as the kink gets, and the vor thing is just kind of hinted at rather than indulged. But you're not going to find any Guro or any Guro, Gore, Scat, or Piss Play in this. There's not going to be any of that, which most people I think are going to be happy about. It's the College of Brats, if you've got a bard who actually wants to get spanked rather than punched in the face. There are Circle of the Lamb Druids, who are service kink and provide additional benefits during rest. For fans of Baldur's Gate, there are Druids from the Circle of the Tamer who can take pet play to extremes, and that presents a rather interesting set of philosophical issues, doesn't it? Is it bestiality if it's a person retaining their intelligence and spirit in the form of an animal? What about more extreme examples? What about in a cyberpunk game if it's someone's mind put it into a beast-shaped cyborganic body? Is that bestiality? What if people put their minds into childlike full Borg conversions as a way of tapping into that market, you know? These are interesting philosophical issues that show that there is depth to this stuff if you care to investigate it. There is a tormenting hunter, which is a fighter who's into causing pain and torment rather than outright killing their enemies. So it's more about counting coup and debuffing the enemy rather than outright killing them. There's Way of the Feather, which are tickle monks. Yes, tickle monks. You know, I was once offered a considerable sum of money to go and film a tickle fetish video. And this is before I was kind of out. I didn't do it, of course, because random people messaging you off the internet asking you to come and tickle some unknown third person on camera. Yeah, I ain't going to be doing that. Thanks. Thanks for the offer, but no. If you're into foot fetishes, and far too many people are, there are also high heel wearing monks. We've got pony play paladins, we've got horrorling rangers who bond with symbiotic aberrations and draw mutual power from them. And similarly, we have those who bond with oozes, if you're into your latex play. There are needle play rogues, there are blood play sorcerers, and again, that's about as hardcore as it really gets here. Which is both good and bad, I guess. It makes it feel incomplete going right up to that line and no further. But again, I think this may be to do with issues around crowdfunding, payment processes, that kind of thing. We get a bunch of feats. In my experience, not many people use feats. There's a few in here that are interesting, like submissive spellcasting, lets you do away with either the verbal or gestural requirements of a spell, so that you can cast while you're gagged or embonded. There are a bunch of spells. Now, I have often thought and expressed that I think spells is where it makes the most sense for there to be a lot of kink, because if we look at the real world and the uses to which people put technology and how that interfaces with the erotic, we can see that so much of our high-tech capabilities are used in sexy ways. Teledildonics, remote control toys, vibrating panties controlled by an app, webcams, the meteoric rise of the internet as a whole. A lot of that can be laid at the feet of porn and sex. AI produced waifus, people playing as 2D characters that can often be a bit naughty and sexy, voice changing software, and various things you can strap to yourself to approximate various other things. There's a lot out there. It's basically down to technology, and what takes the place of technology in most fantasy worlds? Magic. So it makes perfect sense that people would be using scrying to be a peeping Tom, or to use magic in other ways. So that makes the most sense to me. At the same time, I think there's some things they've done that don't make sense for in-game reasons, but I can understand why they've done them for out-of-game reasons. To take the one singular most obvious example in the book, alter sex is a cantrip. Now, I understand why. Alright, there's a lot of people into footers and things, and there are a lot of trans people who would like to become fully the other sex, right? But altering your sex has raw physical changes, not just the obvious, phallus or womb, but also a whole bunch of secondary sexual characteristics, muscle mass, height, bone density, bone length, all of it. Plausibility, right? It is not plausible that altering a character to that degree is a cantrip, right? It doesn't make sense. When you look at the effects of like alter self as a spell, alter sex probably belonged as an additional subset of alter self rather than as a cantrip. So I understand where they're coming from, why they did it the way that they did. It just doesn't make sense, and that is a case of allowing out of game concerns and issues to influence in-game decisions, game design decisions, in a way that is out of step with the system, with the established rules of magic, and so on. That's a problem. Okay, that throws you off. There's a few moments like that throughout the book. Fortunately, not that many. So spells is where kink makes the most sense, where it's also the most cheesy and humorous. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. But there's another problem with magic. When you cast a spell on somebody, NPCs doesn't matter so much, but PCs it does matter quite a lot. That's where you're going to run into issues with safety tools. Now, safety tools is something that the game does advocate, and it definitely has a place in BDSM and kink. You want to make sure everyone's consensual and everyone has a way to tap out with a safe word or whatever. I don't think it's appropriate to have in games necessarily. Use your voice. Get up and remove yourself from the table. Fade to black if necessary. But if I cast Onslaught of 1,000 Phalluses on somebody, which is a real spell in this book, and they say, no, I don't consent, then what do we do? Substitute another spell? That doesn't make sense. You can't have it both ways, and a lot of magic is non-consensual. Like, I don't consent to being fireballed, right? What is the meaningful difference between the two, really? Surely being set on fire is worse, isn't it? One would think. Reminds me, back during the LARP days, I was playing a Cult of Ecstasy mage at a game, and I characterised my attack spells as being prime-infused orgasms, so a sort of mind-life prime effect for those of you who know mage. But it was really just a way of characterising an attack spell. I never expected anyone to play it out. That was never the point. I did end up casting that on someone, and they took enormous umbrage at that fact, even though, it's just another way of effectively saying magic missile, but it illustrates the problem. There's a bunch of items, both mundane and magical, nothing hugely of note particularly, just what you'd need, what you'd expect, though there are magical heals as a sort of nod to Bayonetta, which are guns. And there are cock rings, of course. I think even before anyone thought about it sexually, plenty of people have tried to get away with being able to wear an additional magic ring on their knob. After all, they magically change size to fit what they're put on, so why not? We get a few monsters, of which the booby trap... let me flip back to it. Yeah, the booby trap is probably the best one, and not just because I really like that illustration, but yeah, it's really just a reskin mimic. So why not just imply that mimics can look like other things rather than just chests, perhaps? So it's fun, it's great, it's a good trap. Not that probably most players are going to fall for it, but it does feel somewhat unnecessary at the same time. The leather dragons are quite fun, and it wouldn't be a kinky game without a tentacle monster, so there is a thing called the Aero Squid. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. It's somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but it's not humorous. It's somewhat serious, but it's not po-faced. In terms of style, it's pretty well presented. There's a good mix of erotic art in here, in various styles. It's a bit 5th edition. It could be more graphic. I think I would have wanted it to be more graphic if I were creating it, but I am cognizant of the issues around crowdfunding, hosting, sales, payment processing, all the rest of it, so I can't really give them any shit over that. The layout is readable. It's nothing fancy, but there isn't too much wall of text either. So in terms of style, all things considered, it's an easy read. Yeah, it's effectively presented. The artwork's nice. Let's give it a 4 out of 5 for style. In terms of substance, I mean, unfortunately for most of us, half the book is going to be effectively useless. The other half is very useful, but it is only half a book. The quality is pretty good. There's a few fetishes and things which are glaringly obvious by their absence. So, yeah, I would like to give it more. If you think the world setting is actually going to be of use to you, you should personally score this a bit higher. But for me, given half the book's wasted, I can't really give it more than a 3 out of 5. So what we're looking at then is 4 out of 5 for style, 3 out of 5 for substance. That's 7 out of 10. It's 3.5 out of 5. If you'd find use for the rules part of it, the kinky side of it, then definitely worth a buy. If you play a sexualized campaign, or you run an online horn pit of 5th edition players, then it's going to be worth it to you. If you just want to put a bit of sexuality and romance in your regular games, this isn't the one for you. But as a target audience of 1, I quite liked it. There you go. Zang. I'm now porn adjacent. I run a tabletop game stream regularly with some porn stars, which you can check out with suitable precautions in place at Tabletopless tits.org. And just know that I put as much effort into this campaign as I would any other tits or no tits.